Welcome to the Primetime Sports Talk Basketball Podcast. This is our first podcast. We're getting underway. I'm joined by MJ. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Garrett, introduce yourself to the good people a little bit. Who are you?
Yes, I am the head of the NBA department at Primetime Sports Talk. I've been covering basketball and sports in general for a few years now, but with the Primetime Sports Talk team, we're really picking up things, especially in basketball, and we do a lot of strong things in the other sports. We got a good group going, and we're kind of increasing that content, getting into the audio world. So, yeah.
Fantastic. And to introduce myself a little bit, my name is MJ Hurley. I was with the Scorecrow and Primetime Sports Talk before they both merged. So I'm one of the oddities there. But I've been writing NBA, MLB, pretty much everything under the sun for Primetime Sports Talk. And then I mainly did NFL and fantasy football for Scorecrow. So I do a lot of Warriors for Primetime Sports Talk, and then just some general stuff all over the place. And I've been heading up our social media and YouTube content recently. So that is my main focus, and that is why we are here today. So Garrett, what are we going to talk about today?
We are going to talk about a few things. We're going to talk about some of the disappointments around the league, what it means, what they could change, if anything. Some of them can't change much. And then we're going to touch on some of the contenders, reason to be concerned, not really, it's too early. And then we're going to talk some Utah Jazz because they are still one of the hottest teams, definitely hot talking point. Are they legit? Are they a regular season team? We'll cover that, but we're going to start out with the most disappointing teams of the first half of the season.
I like it. Let's get going.
Yes, and got to start out with the team that made the Western Conference Finals last year, lost, but they went on that run. Everyone had them, repeating that success or being in that conversation with the Denver Nuggets. Jokic is playing unbelievable. That was a given, especially what he did, what he led them to last year. And he really should be the front runner for the MVP. But he's not. And that is, you hate to say it, but that's more so a product of his team than him. They just haven't been able to pick up the wins. He's playing unbelievable still. He started out, a whole nother level. Maybe he's a tad bit under that now, but he should be the favorite. And instead, you're hearing a lot of Embiid and LeBron ahead of him, and rightfully so, because those teams are finding success. But I think a lot of people expected a lot more out of them this year, and instead they find themselves kind of middling as we approach the halfway point. Do they make a trade? Do they keep what they have together? They have the strong assets. What did you expect out of them going into this year?
Here's the thing. I love Jamal Murray. I think he's great. I don't think he's a number 2 option on the championship team. I think he's a number 3. I think ideally down the line in a couple of years when Michael Porter Jr. develops, I think he will be the number 2 to Jokic, and Murray will be, honestly, I'd rather Murray be their 6th man, to be perfectly honest. If they could find just a TJ McConnell type or someone like that to run the ball if needed off their starting unit, then have Murray coming off the bench. I think that is more of an ideal world for them. But because MPJ isn't quite there yet, obviously Jokic is just above every other center in the league. I think even Embiid. What Embiid has turned into in relation of like his skills is incredible. His handles are so much better this year. He's got a pull-up jumper. Like, that part of his game, yes, he's much better. But the fact that Jokic is dishing out, 8.6 assists a game from the center position is incredible. So, I expected them. I think they're the 7th seed right now, 20-15. I expected them to be a little bit better, but I didn't have hopes for them to go back to the Western Conference Finals. Not to bash them, but I do think that was a little bit more of a product of the bubble. I don't think they're as good of a team as the Lakers or the Clippers. I think they're more in the Jazz Blazers realm. And then the Suns have just been a surprise for everybody. I wouldn't have put them at 2nd place, but no, I definitely would not have had them in my top 4 in the West coming into this year, probably.
Yeah. And I did, in terms of regular season, I really expected them to carry over that momentum and be one of those strong regular season teams that really establishes themselves, and goes through the motions of the regular season, or other teams go through the motions, I guess,
Yeah.
and they really, get down to it. But instead they find themselves, I mean, they're only right now a couple of games up on having to have a play-in game, which would be quite the drop off. But I do agree with you on the Murray thing. I think he'd be better off as the third option. I mean, he can get it done in single games and stuff, but he's an electric scorer.
Yeah.
But he doesn't do anything else great. And I think I mean, if you're the second option, especially to a guy like Jokic, I think you need to have more great attributes. So I do agree that, hopefully Porter Jr. develops into that. Hopefully they keep him and allow him to. But for regular season, they've definitely disappointed me. I thought that they would earn a very high seed and then, first, second round. But yeah, matching last year's success, never seemed realistic.
And I think the biggest issue is normally, and this may even out as the season goes on, but right now the Nuggets are only 9-7 at home. One of their biggest advantages is the altitude and having the conditioning over other teams. And if you look at the top 4 teams in the West, they all have double-digit wins at home. Even the Warriors at the 8 seed have double-digit wins at home. Nuggets are not there yet. So I think that's the biggest thing. They need to start winning at home. They have more away wins than home wins right now.
Yeah.
And if they were playing better at home, they would be in a much better position. Granted, the NBA is just very close right now for the most part. Other than the Jazz, which we'll get to later, there's just not a lot of difference even between 1 and 8 seed across the board, because they're sitting there at 20 and 15. Phoenix is 23 and 11. That's not a huge difference. That's a couple of games. That's a swing that could happen very quickly.
Right.
So, I mean, I'm not going to count them out yet of getting one of those top seeds. But if you look at the rest of the West specifically, they don't scare me in relation to anyone above them, other than the only team I would place below them would be the Spurs. They've surprised me. I would take the Nuggets over the Spurs 9 times out of 10. But yeah, it definitely on paper I expected more.
Yeah, and like you said, they really do need that home court advantage come the playoffs because of the advantage they have at home. I know they're not playing up to it right now, but if they want to beat some of the top teams in a playoff series, not in the bubble, they need that home court advantage. They need to learn how to capitalize on it again, and they're simply not going far in the playoffs as a lower seed. They're not going to be upsetting teams without that advantage. But they're kind of similar to an Eastern Conference team that is also disappointing this year. And this team probably had a little bit more of a championship or true championship goal, and that's the Boston Celtics in the East.
Yeah.
They are the 4th seed, but the East is kind of gets messy quickly after the top 3 teams. They're in the 4th seed, but 4 through really 11 is kind of just cluttered together, and with so much time left can go anyway. But to be sitting a game above 500 as we speak, I think that is well below what anyone thought this Celtics team would do this year.
Well, I mean, to your point, Garrett, there's a 3-game difference between 4 and 11. That's ridiculous between the Hawks and the Celtics. I think, and a lot of people have been saying this, and I've been jumping on this bandwagon. When you have Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum, Kemba Walker, and I'll basically say the same thing that I said about Murray, Kemba Walker needs to be coming off the bench or he needs to be dealt, because he just does not move off the ball very well. He's not a good defender. And with a lineup, and I know Marcus Smart has been out and that hurts them a lot. But even then, even with Marcus Smart in that lineup, he's shooting terribly and has been taking way too many shots this year. So there are some things in Boston that need to be figured out. When you have 2 dudes averaging 20 plus points per game that are both all-stars in Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum, you need to be winning more games than sitting at 18-7. Granted, I don't put them in the same caliber as those top 3 teams. I don't put them in the Sixers, Nets, or Bucks. They don't have a star to match up to an Embiid. And I'll say that Jason Tatum yet does not match up to an Embiid, a Kevin Durant, or a Giannis. It just not yet. He's a very good scorer, but the one thing those 3 dudes have over him is they're a lot bigger and they can shut him down. and Jaylen Brown is not going to carry the Celtics when Jason Tatum gets shut down. So I don't know. Bring Kemba Walker off the bench. Marcus Smart needs to get back for that defense. I don't know. I still just think they're a piece or two away, and I couldn't tell you exactly what that is. I think they need a more traditional big man. They've got some really good young big men, but they don't have, and again, they don't have a guy to match up to a Giannis, Embiid, or even Kevin Durant, DeAndre Jordan in the post.
Yeah, and I definitely agree with that. I mean, Tristan Thompson does what he does well and is a really solid player. Same with Daniel Tice. I think they're starting both of them together right now, which I'm not the biggest fan of, but they're a good combination. But neither one of them are that offensive threat at all.
No.
And you kind of want that to take the pressure off the other guys. And then the other thing is that Tatum and Brown, it seems like have taken the last couple steps they've taken faster than Danny Ainge or anyone thought they would.
Yeah.
So that's kind of why the Kemba Walker situation is what it is, because his game doesn't line up necessarily with two wings that in the half court offense you want to feature with the ball, creating things either themselves or others. So I think their games kind of all just collided, and now it made Kemba Walker the odd man out because obviously Tatum and Brown are the future of that organization. So they find themselves in a very awkward spot, I think. And, there's rumblings that they're going to be aggressive on the trade market, but there's always rumblings that they're going to be aggressive on the trade market. And sometimes that doesn't pan out. And, the times it does, it's kind of been in the off season. It hasn't been the game changing thing. So I do still think they're a year or two away from truly getting there. But I think a lot of people expected them to be able to compete with the best in the East. And Jaylen Brown took another big step this year. And I think a lot of people thought that they would be doing better than they are right now, a game over 500.
Yeah, I agree. And the biggest issue is going to be Kemba Walker's contract is going to be really hard to deal. I've been sitting here looking at specifically the East, but even just generally, I don't see a team that A, really needs Kemba, and B, would be willing to take on that money. It's a team I would kind of like to see him go to is Dallas, to make Luka stop having a usage rate of like 37%.
Yeah.
But I don't think they have the money for that, and I don't think they want to mess up. Granted, they're not even in the playoffs right now; they'd be in the play-in. But I still think they're fairly confident in what they have. I just don't really see a great landing spot unless you send him to an OKC or something like that, where they just absorb his contracts, maybe get a pick or something. And I don't even know what OKC would. The issue is I don't have a trade in my head that would really benefit Boston in the short term.
And rightfully so, because it's like Kemba makes sense only for a contending team or a team looking to win games.
Right.
If they're going to give up something of value, which Boston obviously needs. And then his money doesn't really work. And then, a team like Dallas, it would make a lot of sense this year, but Dallas has a lot of flexibility in the coming off seasons.
Yeah.
And I don't know exactly when Kemba's deal's up, but I know he's under contract for more than just the season. And do they really want to tie themselves to him with his injury issues, with, the drop off in the play? It would help them in the short term, but I think that they are still planning for the coming years a little bit too much to pull the trigger on a Kemba type player.
Yeah, I want to see when Kemba Walker's contract is up. He is an unrestricted free agent after the 2022-23 season.
Yeah, so
he still has, after this year, 2 more years where he's at a price tag of $37 million, which I'm sorry, he's just not worth that at this point in time. And maybe that would be different if he was the main option on the team. But the issue and the reason Charlotte moved on is he wasn't able to be the main option on a championship contending team. And if you're not that option, nobody's going to want to pay you $37 million. Right. So Boston's going to have to give up draft picks or something if they're going to want that contract gone. For the most part, would be my guess. Because again, I don't see somebody just taking that on.
Yeah, and that's not the type of deal that is going to happen in season this season, because it's not going to help them this year. So they kind of just find themselves meddling, seeing what happens in the Eastern Conference. I mean, they did make a little bit of a run last year that just like the Nuggets, it was a little bit more of a run than people expected out of them.
Yeah.
So they might just be holding what they have, seeing if they can make a little bit of noise, but they do have quite a few issues to work out if they want a real chance at making a run.
And it's interesting. I'm looking at their numbers. Their defense is pretty good. They have the second best or third best defense in the East. Um, they're just not scoring points, which is interesting given you got two guys averaging 20, almost 25 points per game apiece in Brown and Tatum. And you've got Kemba Walker, who's supposed to be just a pure scorer, and they're just not scoring a lot of points. They're only averaging 111, which sounds like a lot, but there are very few contending teams in the East that are averaging less than that. So
yeah, that's still bottom third of the NBA right now in terms of scoring. So they definitely got some issues to figure out, but those are two playoff teams from last year and should be playoff teams this year. But our third disappointing team this season is not a playoff team and has plenty more issues than the two teams listed already. And that's the Minnesota Timberwolves, who own the worst record in the NBA at 7-28 as we speak.
Yeah, as a Golden State Warriors fan, I'm in heaven. I am in heaven.
As you should be, because I think a lot of people are forgetting, it's not being talked about enough that the Warriors get that Minnesota first round pick if it doesn't fall 1, 2, 3. So right now they're the worst team, but remember the lottery is a little bit different nowadays. They got a better chance of dropping out, and they have a little bit of talent on that team. They have a lot of talent on that team at the top, where if guys are healthy the second half of the year, they can start winning some games, and they're too far out to make a play-in game at this point, I think.
Oh yeah.
And they win some games and get the Warriors a fifth pick. I mean,
that'd be scary.
Right.
Because even if, like, let's say the Timberwolves finish with the worst record and they somehow get the first pick, which almost never happens in the lottery now. But if it somehow did happen, if they got 1, 2, 3, they get their unprotected pick next year. And I don't see them being even if the Timberwolves have then 2 top 3 picks in a row, D'Lo and Cat, they're just struggling. And I don't see a lot of good rotational pieces around those guys. So, I mean, for the Timberwolves, it's disappointing. D'Lo's been hurt. Karl Anthony Towns is playing well, but again, for how dynamic he is, he can shoot from 3. I mean, he is the new big man. He is the poster child for the new big man with Embiid and Jokic, but his team is not winning games. And yes, part of that is what he has around him. I mean, I'll be honest, I didn't love the Anthony Edwards at number 1 pick when it happened, especially because of what came out a couple of days before, that he was like, yeah, I don't really like basketball. This wasn't the sport I wanted to play. And I'm like, I know people harp on like the Kobe mentality and all of that. And that, I think in basketball more than any sport, that really is a thing. Like there's only 5 guys on the court. Like, you got to go out there and want it, especially if you're the top pick and you're going into a franchise that has not been doing well. So
it's a star-driven league like no other league is. So you need guys to have that dog in them, because you're only going to compete with those guys. And Minnesota, the surrounding pieces are the biggest issue to start. I mean, they got rid of Saunders, so I think that was one of the big things because things just weren't working. But the surrounding pieces have remained questionable. But either way, D'Angelo's missed time, Towns has missed time and gone through a ton of stuff. So I sympathize with both of them and their situations. But the fact is, they're both young players that are all-stars in this league. They have both been all-stars. They're proven as that caliber player. To have those two and the first overall pick, regardless of who they took there, and the first overall pick in this draft, and then veterans on the team, whether you like him or not, Rubio is a capable point guard. They do have some guys that can play. It's just completely unacceptable, even with the missed time from their stars, to be sitting at 7-28. And now I think they find themselves in one of the toughest positions, because what do they do exactly if they start winning games? I mean, I'm not a fan of rest your players to lose games, but what do you do if you get hot and you're Minnesota and you know that pick, if it's 4th or later, is not going to be yours? And it already looks like you made a mistake. And I think Edwards he's impressed me. He's been better than I thought he was going to be early on. So I think he still has a lot of upside. But I think this year, LaMelo would solve a couple of issues that they've had, and Wiseman even might have. And things are getting increasingly questionable there. And the time is ticking on Towns, and losing seasons are racking up in Minnesota, and they really got to put it together. But this season, they can't put it together for the second half, or they're shooting themselves in the foot.
How long till Karl Anthony Towns requests out of Minnesota?
That's the $1 million question right now. And I think that they bought themselves some time by acquiring Russell, because they're good friends. They've been good friends. That's his guy. But I mean, you got to think, if this season continues like this, next season, if it's just as bad, it could come during next season. Realistically, I mean, I don't know how much they'll listen to him, because I don't think that they really can.
Yeah.
But he's got to be growing frustrated, and I know he's had a lot of stuff go on with him, so maybe he, gives them some more time. Maybe he just needs to get more settled in and back into a normal life. I know a lot of us do, but he needs to get back into a normal life to really take the next step in his career, where leading his team to W's. But if you're the front office, if you're fans of the Timberwolves, you got to be scared that it's going to happen soon.
Yeah, I mean, if you can keep Russell, Edwards, and you add another top pick, even if if they can somehow get the 4th pick and fall in that perfect sweet spot, that could be a very dynamic roster next season. I agree. I think LaMelo really would help them, especially since D'Lo's been out. I mean, a roster of D'Lo, Malik Beasley, Edwards, and Towns, that is really good. When healthy, that should be a playoff contending team.
Yeah.
Again, I recognize D'Lo has not been healthy, but to me, that just shows that I wouldn't label Karl Anthony Towns a superstar, because I mean there have been some very bad teams that have been carried by superstars. I mean, even right now, the Sixers roster is good. Ben Simmons is an incredible defender, but we all know Joel Embiid is carrying that team. Like, you take Embiid and put Cat on that team, they're not number 1 in the East. Like, it's very clear. So yeah, it makes me frustrated, but then as a Warriors fan, I'm like, this could end up really well for us.
And it makes me frustrated as a fan of the game as well, because they have such talent. And I didn't even mention Beasley, and he's serving his suspension now, which is like another blow to their season of guys missing time for this reason or that reason. But it's at that point where they, with those guys, even with one guy missing, when Towns is there, they need to be winning more games. So I think it was the right decision to move on from Saunders. It might have been a little bit later than when they could have done it. But I agree. I can't put him in that superstar category. The difference to me in getting from star to superstar is always when you're out there, your team wins enough games.
Yeah.
To be relevant. You got to at least be winning 500 with a bad roster around you. You got to be able to dominate a game like that, where you control the pace, you control the defensive side, you make the impact that your team wins the games, and then you do your thing late, pick up the W's.
Yeah. Can we just talk about, though, and I know I'm a homer on this, but like, if the Warriors somehow get the 4th pick, I don't even know who the projected or top 3 pick, 4th pick, whatever.
No, 4th. Yeah,
4th. Yeah. If they can somehow get that, and they have Steph, Clay back, then probably Wiggins or whoever they draft, Draymond, Wiseman, who actually has figured out how to play NBA basketball, which I don't knock the kid at all. He played 5 games in college and has been thrown into an NBA fire.
Yeah.
The kid is talented. He just fouls way too much. Yeah. So a second-year Wiseman, and then you have Oubre coming off the bit. That scares me if I'm the NBA.
And the way the Warriors draft and have drafted in the past, I think that's scary for the rest of the NBA. Even if it's not the 4th pick, even if it's down to the 8th pick, the 10th pick, if they add that kind of player to be a role player in the coming years, develop along the guys they have with the staff they have, I mean, that's an incredibly scary thing that becomes a super deep roster all of a sudden when it really, I mean, there were questions about how deep that roster was going to be entering this past offseason. And you add
Yeah.
that kind of lottery pick to it, all of a sudden you're looking at a roster that's getting deeper and deeper, and it has really good talent at every spot.
And I'm looking just out of curiosity. I think Kuminga would be the top prospect. I haven't looked at a lot of draft stuff. Either him, Evan Mobley, maybe. Because I'm trying to think. I mean, the Warriors aren't going to draft a guard. Most likely, I wouldn't. They'd probably. Oh. Honestly, they could draft a big man like a Mobley, or Kuminga, and they could run Draymond as a 3 basically, and then have Oubre and Wiggins off their bench.
Yeah, they'll have a ton of options. They'll have the luxury that other teams don't have in the lottery usually, and they didn't even have last year, where it was like you really draft whatever you want. You don't have to draft the best player available, which I think is what you do, but they don't necessarily have to. They could draft the best piece to fit around them for the coming years to get back into that title talk, or they could get creative and they can go the trade route with it. And I mean, the options will be endless for them if they get that pick, no matter where it falls at this point. It's not getting out of the lottery.
They also have their first round pick in the draft, and then a second from Denver and a second from Minnesota.
Yeah. So they have all sorts of flexibility.
Yeah. They have a lot of options. And again, not to harp too much on the Warriors because they're my team, but that's going to be scary. And again, assuming Clay comes back normally, but given his game, literally, I don't even need him to go dunk or play in the post anymore. Just sit in the corner and shoot threes as one of the greatest 3-point shooters of all time, and I'm happy. Yeah. That's all I need.
And it's just more luxury to take their time bringing him back. The more talent they add, the more they get. I mean, maybe they do take a kind of combo guard in the draft, and that's just the perfect 6-man to have a 3-guard rotation with those two.
Yeah.
And at the beginning of the year, you bring Clay along slowly. You know, you let him the pick develop with Steph, and then work things out from there. But the options are endless, and it's kind of scary how quickly they could bounce back. You know, given where they were last year.
Yeah. Last disappointment I want to talk about, and then Garrett, if there's anything else you got. And I know the rest of the roster is not very good, but I'm still very disappointed in the Wizards. To me, that shows I've never been impressed by Russell Westbrook, and I think he's the reason that the duo in Houston failed with James Harden. I don't think it was James Harden. And I think Russell Westbrook has to be like the first and only option to be successful. And I know he had, triple-double seasons, and that's incredibly impressive. He can definitely pass the ball. He can definitely be a scorer, but he's extremely inefficient. He can't shoot very well, and he just does not seem to be on winning teams. He got really close in 2016, and I think it's more of an indicative of the way Westbrook was playing that Kevin Durant left than necessarily title chasing. Obviously, when you have a chance to go to the Warriors, at that point in time, you go to the Warriors. Like, if they make that offer, you say yes. But I don't think it's a shock that Westbrook has consistently had superstar talent next to him, and he just cannot sit back and be the second option. Bradley Beal is averaging the most points per game in the NBA, and you have Westbrook, who is a star, not a superstar in my opinion, is a star, and you need 2 stars in the NBA to be successful, and they are 13 and 20.
Yeah, and I do agree. I am a little bit higher, and I will defend Russ more than might be popular, but I do. Okay. I mean, I can't argue with the fact that they are extremely disappointing just because of the level of talent they have between their top 2 players. Because love him or hate him, Russell Westbrook's an incredibly talented player.
Oh yeah,
Beal is obviously unreal, and then doing unreal things this year. And I think the biggest reason for their failures to me has been the rest of that roster. but I do think Westbrook has always had an issue with doing what they need out of him, whichever team he's on. He's always doing a little bit more, or wants to do a little bit more, wants to take on a little bit more of a role, more featured than is best for the team, maybe. But Washington really, I mean, they didn't address anything with their big guys. Thomas Bryant got hurt, and that definitely hurt him, but he is not a player to fear on defense, and they really
Yeah.
just have been getting burned all year on that end of the floor. They are playing a little bit better right now. I mean, best case scenario, they continue doing that. They back end into the playoffs and they lose early. So what's it really worth? But I mean, it's kind of sad to see both Beal and Westbrook there, given the limited success they've had, even playing in the weaker Eastern Conference. I mean, those two players should be winning more games just based off their talent alone. Like the Timberwolves, it's you have players of that caliber, you need to win more games regardless of who you have around them.
And I mean, Westbrook is not doing terribly. He's averaging 20 points per game, and then he's got 9.8 rebounds, 9.8 assists. So he's very close to another triple-double season, which would be incredible in and of its own. But he's shooting 28 from three.
Yeah.
And I mean, for how much people go after Ben Simmons for not being able to shoot from three, and Giannis for having his struggles from three. I mean, again, imagine Westbrook if he had a jump shot.
Yeah.
I mean, his jump shot is the jankest thing I've ever seen in my life. It just looks nasty sometimes when he goes up, especially from mid-range. I mean, imagine if that guy had a jump shot.
Got to be one of the worst shooters that will fall in love with his own three-point shot during a game. I mean, he will have games where he will chuck threes, and people knock Ben Simmons for not shooting threes, but compared to Russ Westbrook, would you rather have the guy who just won't shoot them and it does affect the defense, or the guy who does shoot them, but the defense can play him in the same way? But the defense is going to play him the same way. They'll go under the screens. They'll sag just as far off because they want him to shoot. So I think, I mean, I'm an advocate. Ben Simmons does need to try shooting more threes. I can't imagine that he's even that bad at them because he's always working on them, it seems.
Yeah.
But I mean, Westbrook, it's like with how many he shoots, you got to compare that with Simmons. I'd rather have the guy who's not going to shoot him, because at least we could find another possession on that side of the ball, you know?
Yeah. And I'm looking at, I can't believe that this ever happened. I'm looking at how many threes a year on average Westbrook takes in a game. Right now, he's at about 3.8, which I'm not super upset with.
Yeah.
I mean, if they're open threes, I can live with that. He makes one a game. Okay.
Yeah.
I can live with that. In his MVP season in 2016, he was taking 7.
And what did he shoot percentage wise that year?
That was his best year ever at 34%.
Okay.
Which, again, at that clip, I can kind of live with it. Not at the 25, 28 clip he's been shooting the last couple of years.
No.
I mean, he was sitting around 30 most of his career, and then he's just dropped off a cliff the last 3 years. He just forgot how to shoot even worse. So, and his free throws have gotten even worse. He used to be an 85% free throw shooter, and he's shooting 60% from free throw this year.
Yeah, and that's the biggest concern of it all, is that's what makes me think that it's not correctable to get back up to that respectable percentage of mid-30s, because, I mean, free throws and three-pointers almost always go together. I think LaMelo Ball is kind of breaks that rule so far in his rookie year, but you have, if you're a good shooter, you can knock down your free throws. And Westbrook, I mean, on that team, 3.8 threes, that's fine with me. That really is, because they don't have many scoring threats, especially once Bryant went down. I mean, it's Beal and Westbrook, and they're going to have to score. And I think that's lower than I expected him to be on the year.
Yeah. Jazz time?
Yeah, let's talk Utah Jazz. And
love it.
How legit they really are.
I will let you go first on this one, because I'm intrigued what you have to say.
Yes. There's a lot of discussion on them. You know, a lot of people think that they're awesome team, all that, but they're not with the top teams in the NBA. And I did tend to lean on that side, even when they went on their crazy streak that they were on. They're still playing great basketball. I would tend to say the same thing, but lately I have switch my train of thought because it just seems like that team has something special about them. They do love playing together. I think that they kind of have bought into the, everyone knocks Rudy Gobert. I wasn't a fan of his contract. I'm still not. I think that's a little bit too much to give to a player that is that limited offensively. But I really do think that they have all the pieces there to make a deep run. I don't think they'll be able to, when push comes to shove, beat all of the top teams in a row to win a championship. But I do think that they can make a deep run and then they run into a Clippers or a Lakers at the end. I think that'll be their breaking point. But you put them in a series right now, or fast forward to the playoffs, them in a series against any team, I'm not counting them out. I do think that they're legitimate. I just think that they would fall short of being there, but I have them up there as a true contender.
Here's the thing for me. Right now, they're 27-8. So they're 35 games into an 82 game season. The NBA is actually playing 82 this year, right?
72.
72. Dang.
Yeah. So
okay.
They're almost halfway.
Okay, so they're basically halfway.
Yeah.
Pretty much everybody on their team is playing at the highest efficiency of their career. And I just find it hard to believe that that's going to last. Jordan Clarkson is averaging 18 points per game as their sixth man, which is incredible. Yeah. Mike Conley, low resurgence. He's at 16 a game. Bojan Bogdanovic, 15 a game. Gobert is even dropping 14 with his usual 13 boards and 3 blocks a game. Here's the issue. Gobert's not going to average those type of numbers when he's got Anthony Davis and LeBron in the paint. Jordan Clarkson is not going to average those type of numbers when he's got Pat Bev on him, following him around through an entire series. So I'll agree with you that they could make a run, but to me, their ceiling at most is a conference finals appearance, and then I think they get smacked. Because they're playing LeBron and the Clippers during the year, who, let's be honest, the Lakers aren't trying, the Clippers aren't trying. They don't need to. They both have multiple stars, because I'm not going to call Paul George a superstar. I refuse. I refuse.
I'm not going to argue with it.
Yeah. I mean, Lakers have 2 superstars. Clippers have a superstar and a star. Whatever. Paul George is still a very good defender, so I'll give him that. I mean, I just still don't see it. Donovan Mitchell is not doing enough to me. I mean, 25 points a game, very good. They're very good at spreading the ball around. Their defense is very efficient. I'm not knocking what they're doing. I just don't think that come playoff time, they're going to be able to sit down and take down even. I mean, if I go to the standings, let me see. The Suns, honestly, I think the Suns match up pretty well.
I agree with that.
You've got Chris Paul and Devin Booker for Clarkson and Mitchell, or Conley and Mitchell, whoever's on the floor at the time. Obviously, I give the Lakers and the Clippers both the advantage. The Trailblazers, they've had some injury issues, but I'm not gonna count Dame out. And I think in a shootout, Dame wins over Donovan Mitchell. The Nuggets, I also think match up really well, because Jokic is gonna test Gobert and make him work. And granted, Gobert is probably the best guy to shut down Jokic, but Jokic is playing out of his freaking mind. Right. So that gives me, realistically, 5 of the other top 7 teams that I think they match up well against. I think it's not till you get down to the Warriors that I start saying, okay, the Jazz are a significantly better team. I don't know how much of it is schedule. I'd have to, sit down and really analyze their schedule. But they just, and I normally hate saying this, and I normally rip on people who say this, but I'm going to say it for one of the first times in my life. I said on my show the other day, for me, they just don't pass the eye test. Like, they just don't go out there and impress me. And granted, I haven't watched every single game. But if you take a look at some of their losses, they lost to Phoenix, they lost to Brooklyn, lost to New York. That was a close game. It was a 2-point game. Lost to the Nuggets, lost to the Clippers, lost to Miami, lost to New Orleans. Those are all teams that have a really good big man and good defensive players across the board.
Yeah.
So when you put them up against a team like that, they have shown vulnerability. Yes, they went out, they beat the Clippers once, they beat Miami once, they beat Philadelphia, they beat Milwaukee. So they have the ability to win those games, but at the same time, they're not convincing me. They're doing a very good job, and this is what I say across all sports. If you want to do well, you have to beat up on the bad teams, and they're doing a very good job beating up on the bad teams, and I give them props for that. But again, you get into a playoff series where you're playing 7 games against each other, and that team's whole focus for the next 2 weeks is to beat you. I just don't buy it.
Yeah, and it looks like they're 15-3 against the Eastern Conference, which not all the teams in the Eastern Conference are bad teams, but that does fall somewhat in line, with beating up on the bad teams. I will say though, the eye test, they don't pass with flying colors for me. They do win a lot of games where it feels like they shouldn't win.
Yeah.
In the games that I've watched or the games that I've seen, they come out with a lot of wins against or in performances. It doesn't really seem that they were going to get it. But I do think that all they got to do is get a couple of their shooters hot. If their guard combinations, I'm a huge Clarkson fan. Love what he's doing.
Yeah.
I think he's the hands down 6th man of the year. He's a baller. Bogdanovich, him, Mitchell, Conley, the combination of them gets hot. I see them knocking off a team or two that maybe they shouldn't. But like we both said, they're going to run into someone where they're not going to have the juice to do it anymore. I mean, Bogdanovich is basically their starting 4 most nights.
Yeah.
That's going to be an issue when you're playing the Clippers or the Lakers in a 7-game series. But they're my favorite team to knock off a couple of better overall teams and kind of do a favor maybe to a Lakers or a Clippers that they face in the Western Conference Finals. They might beat someone who's a better matchup, like the Nuggets beat the Clippers, who everyone said was the better matchup for the Lakers. I could see them doing something like that where they go on a run and then it's like, oh, they run into the big wall at the end, and it kind of changes, how this team made it to the finals.
Yeah. And I could very well see that because right now their first matchup would be the Warriors. Assuming they beat the Warriors, I don't think that'll be an easy series. But I still think they would probably win that. Then their next matchup would possibly be the Nuggets right now in the seeding we would have. Because I think the Nuggets would be a team that could take down the Suns. That matchup is not very far off to me. Yeah. I'd probably give the Suns a slight advantage, but again, I'm not huge on the Suns either. They play really good defense, and I'm not gonna count out Chris Paul, especially when he's got a guy like Devin Booker by him. But again, just in this scenario, if the Nuggets do win that, then the Jazz get the Nuggets, and that's somewhere where I think they could run into some issues.
Right, and then there's a lot of close stuff going on in both conferences, so a lot of this can change. But you also have the Spurs who are in the playoff picture right now, which is another team that if they face, I got them taking care of business. I mean, all respect to what the Spurs are doing and Popovich and all of that, but they could make a little run, and we might be looking at 2 sides of a bracket in the West where they're the cream of the crop in this side of the bracket, and then the other side just tears each other apart.
Yeah.
And then they run into the better team. But I do think it's very promising for what they're building long term. I mean, they're having this success. They're very good at adding these little pieces around. They got Clarkson. That was a great addition. They re-signed him. So I think it's very promising for what they could do, but I think they need Mitchell to take another step. I still have issue with Gobert's contract, but as long as they're winning this many games, I'm not going to I can't argue with that much. So I do think they could do some things in the offseason in the coming years that can push them to that true, I could see them going to the finals, winning the finals. But right now, it just seems like there's a little bit too much power at the very top, the very top. They are at the very top among the very best teams.
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, their calling card is their defense. The Lakers have an even better defense than they do in points per game. And Anthony Davis hasn't even been there the last few weeks. So again, I mean, if you want to say they're going to make the conference finals, I'd be okay with that. But they're going to have to take down either the Clippers or the Lakers first, most likely. And I don't see that happening particularly. And that's just
I think there's mismatches on the floor in those matchups. I think that those other teams just have an advantage with the closers. They have guys that have been there and done it before that will take over the game. I mean, Kawhi, I don't know how they're stopping him coming down the stretch.
Yeah.
LeBron and AD, I think they just have nightmare situations where they still need a piece or two when it comes to a playoff series. Playoffs are a lot different than regular season.
Yep.
But what they're doing is incredible. I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm very impressed with what they're doing this season.
Yeah.
But right now, we just have such strong teams at the top of the NBA. I mean, it's really incredible, and people aren't even talking that much about the Clippers this year.
No.
Kind of flying under the radar for. I mean, a year ago, up until what happened in the bubble, it was them and the Lakers. They were side by side with what they could do, and everyone kind of just taking a step back on the Clippers. I think they're just as much of a contender this year as they were last year, if they sorted out those issues that came to bite them. But the Jazz are going to run into someone where it's going to, they'll be worn out by then and they'll fall a little bit short, but they're an incredible team and they're going to go on a little bit of a run, I would say.
And that's the thing, is they're going to have to try a lot harder, I think, than a lot of other teams. And like I said earlier, honestly, the Lakers and Clippers are probably kind of coasting right now, and they're still in the same category as the Jazz. So that's the thing for me. Last thing I want to mention before we wrap up is I mentioned TJ McConnell as a possible type guy for the Nuggets earlier. I think the man just got a triple-double tonight with steals.
How many steals did he finish with? Because before we jumped on, I saw that he was at 8 at the half.
Yes, he finished with 10. His stat line was 16 points, 13 assists, and 10 steals.
That is incredible, but I'm a little bit not disappointed in his performance, but I believe the all-time record for steals is 11, and I really want to see him I want to see him at least tie it, but it would have been so awesome to see him break that record. 8 in the first half was phenomenal.
He set the record for steals in a half.
Yeah, absolutely incredible. Who are they playing?
The Cavs.
All right. Does make a little bit more sense, but you don't you don't trip into double-digit steals. You don't trip into 8 steals and a half either.
James Harden also just got a triple-double in his return to Houston.
Yeah, I had heard that there were slight boos. I don't know how many fans are at that game, but
a decent amount, I think. Yeah.
I would have expected more boos than that, but I guess they're all right with, over that time.
They probably want to be out of Houston too.
I don't blame them. They got issues going there across sports.
Yeah, everybody wants out of Houston, no matter what sport.
Yeah, I feel bad for a Houston fan.
One of my closest friends here at school is a diehard Houston fan. He grew up in Houston, and the only 2 Houston jerseys he had were George Springer and James Harden, and they're both gone.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad he didn't have a Watt jersey or something else.
Yeah,
Hopkins jersey, Watson, depending on how that plays out. At least he didn't invest in one of those.
Yes, he was smart. He said, "I'm not dumb enough to invest in the Texans." Like, that's fair. But Garrett, any last words for us today?
No, I'm looking forward to the All-Star break. Not the game itself, but seeing some teams get healthy. We got a lot of guys, a lot of top guys that are sitting out through the break. I'm hoping that we get, Durant, AD. I think LeBron's even sitting tonight. Get those guys back, and I think we're gonna have an incredible second half of the season.
Solid. And as we get closer to the trade deadline, we'll get some more info there, break down a couple of targets as we get closer. We had that conversation with the Celtics earlier, but I'm sure there will be much more of that as well.
Absolutely.
Sounds good. Well, thank you everybody for watching. Garrett, MJ, thank you as always. We'll talk to you guys later.